Hello, I'm EnterElysium, and welcome to my thoughts on my hands-on preview of Imperator Rome. So, last week, Paradox Studios were lovely enough to be able to set a press event, which I got to go to, in which I got to get some hands-on playtime and preview footage on a very early beta indeed, of Imperator Rome. Imperator Rome being the new grand strategy game from Paradox, the same people who brought you Hearts of Iron, Stellaris, Europa Universalis 4, Crusader Kings. Yeah, it's a lot of the stuff that I really love. And as you might guess, Imperator Rome is, again, another grand strategy game, but this time set in the age of Rome. I believe it starts, as you can see in the top right-hand corner, there is a date there. That's not BC. It would be kind of weird if the Romans counted their calendar down to something, and they were like, I have no idea what counting down to. But how many years until that thing happens? Oh, it's 450 years until that thing's happened. Oh, well, that's weird. You know what's going to happen? No, I've got no idea. It's going to be really cool, though. You sure? Okay. Yeah, they have no idea what's happening, so it's not going to be a BC. It's actually years since the foundation of Rome, which I believe puts it at about 300 BC right now. So you start in 300 BC, so it's not Rome at its height. Rome right now, as you can see in this footage, I'm actually playing Rome right now, starts as a moderately powerful state in the middle of Italy. You aren't all powerful and domineering, but you do start off in a relatively decent position, although there are other powers who can certainly challenge you in the area. And of course, the nations after the fall of Alexander the Great are still there, like you've got three big chunky nations over past Greece after the fall of Alexander the Great and all his successors made a bit of a ham of it, let's just put it that way. Either way, Rome starts off in a pretty decent position. Right now, I'm actually playing the tutorial. You can see those objectives down the side. I actually really like the tutorial. I know it's like really early, and it's a very early beta I played, and a tutorial is something normally you would probably add towards the end of development because it doesn't change base mechanics, it just explains mechanics, and those mechanics could change during development. But actually, I really liked this tutorial, even if it is only a very early work in progress. Partly because previously I've heard from Paradox that, oh, we're not going to put tutorials in our games, or we don't need to focus on tutorials because people can learn from YouTubers. And while I very much, yeah, sure, send me all the views to my videos, I actually personally very much feel that games should explain their mechanics and allow you to play them without having to look externally for something else. Personally, I feel that games should at least attempt to, as much as they can, be self-contained. I don't feel you should have to, come to my channel as much as I would like you to view my channel and give me all the YouTube ad revenue so I can afford water and electricity and Imperator Rome. I feel that games should be self-explained. I will be honest, this tutorial was actually really good. This tutorial actually taught me to play the game. We sat down and they basically said, this is Imperator Rome, this is basically how it works. There's a tutorial, I recommend you play the tutorial. That was basically our briefing. And then we were like, okay, we played the tutorial, and that's how we learned the basics. We didn't get any, booklet of how to play the game or anything so we could get up to speed. Straight up, these objectives, this little tutorial system worked really well. I'm actually really pleased about that because it makes the game much more accessible to people. And that's often a problem with Paradox games, is that they are so deep, they can be a little bit hard to grip. And I know I'm going to bang on a little bit too far about a tutorial, but it's something I really like. Because anytime I can convert more people to playing amazing strategy games, and then I can geek out with them about strategy games, I think that's a win. So, anyway, right now we're playing as SPQR, which is the Latin that I don't know what it stands for, because I would forget if I looked it up, because it's Latin. For Rome, we're playing as Rome right now in the tutorial, and you can see that we're, basically going around learning things and expanding our empire, as you're meant to do, of course. So, along the top, you will notice a few things. You'll notice that we've got icons and numbers. These are the basic resources you have to work with. In any strategy game, you have, of course, got your management of finances and all the other resources of whatever kind you have. Now, some of these are going to sound familiar. I'm just going to go through them real quick. Starting at the left, you've got the little money bag, which is money. That's the obvious one. I can't remember what they actually call the money in this system. I think it's probably going to be denarii, which is the money that the Romans used, but I'm not sure if that changed via date and there's a different name for the money at different points in time, because I only know denarii. It might be a different coin at this era. No idea. But that's the money in the system. Secondly, and you'll very much remember this if you know EU4, manpower. Then you've got the scales, which is stability, which is a measure of how stable your realm is, how everyone is working together cohesively, or there's more factional infighting, or people are dubious because of how things are going. Then you've got the seizing the wreath, that is corruption. That happens if you do tyrannical actions like seizing power, seizing property, lands, etc. Then you've got the helmet with the plume, that would be military power. Of course, you can spend that to do actions such as researching military technology or reducing war exhaustion, which tends to creep up if you've got war happening and can cause issues in your realm like unrest. Then, of course, you've got the wreath, which is your civic resource. The thing might be called your gravitas, your civic resource. It basically allows you to do certain like researchy, influential actions. Then you've got the scroll, which is your oratory power. That's very much like your charisma. It allows you to do certain diplomatic actions. And then you've got your religious power. And religious power is like kind of a big thing in this game, and it allows you to do a number of things, including raising your stability. And I think it's stability is the religious action, but it also allows you to do omens, which are these kind of buffs that you apply for a good period of time to your nation, based on like you worshipping certain sects or certain gods or pantheons or whatever you do. You will have these options. Now, some of those will sound familiar. If you've played Europa Universalis before, which of course is the medieval / Renaissance, I mean, Renaissance is very much specific to a certain period of northern Italy and didn't last that long, so kind of medieval / late medieval period game from Paradox, which came out a good while ago now. You will recognize, obviously, money, but also manpower and stability, and possibly some other powers. But specifically, manpower and stability are very familiar, and that's because Europa Universalis 4 has a lot in common with Imperator. In fact, it is probably about 60% of Imperator. Imperator is a good chunk of Europa Universalis 4. It plays very similarly in a lot of measures and has a lot of similar systems. For instance, the Europa Universalis fort system, in which forts control land around them, and then to be able to move past them, if you're attacking the person, you need to take the fort before you're allowed to move on. And that's implemented in Imperator Rome. A number of other systems are as well. Obviously, manpower to be able to actually build up your depleted forces in fights and stuff, and to recruit people, and stability is a measure of, togetherness in your realm. That's all from Europa Universalis 4. I think it's a case of, Paradox have come to these systems and said, we've developed these systems, and hey, if they're not broke, don't fix them. They work. But that's only part of the story. The other part plays maybe 10 to 20% like Crusader Kings 2, which is a Dark Age to early medieval game that was the very first one built in the Clausewitz engine, which Paradox have used for Imperator, which was much more about controlling an individual character, and then their offspring, and then their offspring. You controlled effectively throughout the game a dynasty, and at each individual time you picked and were playing one character, telling people to do things. In Imperator, you actually play a character, but you are playing a character playing a nation as opposed to the dynasty that you were focusing on in Crusader Kings. And this is important because each person you interact with in Imperator will have their own wants, needs, and desires and their own statistics, unlike in Europa Universalis 4, where your generals were merely this good at attacking, this good at defending, this good at sieging. In Imperator, they have their own money, and they have their own corruption. They have prominence, they have fame, and they have loyalty. I think the fame might actually be popularity. Yeah. So, what this means is that, say, if I put someone with a high corruption as a governor, I believe it's their percentage of corruption is taken away from the income, and they siphon it into their own coffers. So if they've got 5% corruption, they take 5% of the income from the province away, and they put it in their own bank. And this is important because if they are disloyal to you, and if they rebel against you, they will start using that money to hire people to join the army to fight you. So people who are disloyal but have no money aren't particularly dangerous, whereas if they are disloyal and have a large amount of money, they're quite dangerous, and they will hire people and they will murder you. Now, the other two, which is prominence, which is a measure of how well known they are and how this can be used to influence people and leverage things, they also have a popularity mechanic. And this means that, for instance, if you give a general who is somewhat disloyal, who is highly prominent and highly popular an army, that general might just turn that army around, cross the Rubicon, and kick you out of the Senate and make an autocracy out of you. Yeah, we could have ourselves a Caesar, based on those mechanics, which I think is really, really cool. And obviously, Paradox have designed it so that you could have a Julius Caesar character who is really popular, who is liked by the troops, who maybe has enough money to maybe hire a few more, and of course, who has a high prominence. And if you annoy them, then they can come back to Rome and try and kick you out. And I really, really like that. The fact you have the ability to control a nation, you have this deep EU4 system of actually being able to control a nation over time, as opposed to CK2. Crusader Kings was a bit more ropey on controlling your nation because obviously you're playing directly through a character. And it was Paradox's first game in the Clausewitz engine and Paradox's first popular game. I feel that Imperator hits a lovely balance where you're playing a character, you've got to be cautious and managing the people in your realm who are popular, who are influential, who are rich, because of course the money can be used by them. At the same time, you still control a nation. And I really, really like that. I'm actually really looking forward to Imperator because I think it adds the best elements of Europa Universalis along with some of the best things about CK2. Making sure that your nobles are not going to rebel. So the last, most obvious three core mechanics in the game are populations, trade, and of course buildings. So all of these tie in a little bit to pops. I'm going to call them pops. Populations, individual measures of population. These are, I believe off the top of my head, slaves at the lowest, then tribesmen, then freemen, and then citizens. Now, I would normally just say citizens or people belonging to your civilization, but that's actually a very specific rank. Citizens are your top tier. They are the people who are well off and who are full citizens, whereas slaves obviously don't have anywhere near the same rights. And each of them produces certain things differently, and you have all four tiers. Now, you might necessarily not have a lot of citizens. In fact, in many provinces, you might have no citizens if you are, say, a tribe. I'll flip the footage over here. Here we're now playing the Iceni, which is a British tribe. They are situated in southeastern Britain. I think Queen Boudica, however you pronounce her name, I've heard different. She fought the Romans when they invaded Britain. She was the queen of the Iceni tribe. Off the top of my head, that is that's pre-GCSE history. But she was a queen of the Iceni tribe. Now, they start as a tribal, I think it's a tribal chieftain or something, where they have a lot of tribesmen and very few, almost no citizens. Whereas Rome will have a lot of citizens. And this ties into a number of different mechanics. The more citizens you have, the more supply you have in a province, the more people you can have stationed there in an army before they start to run out of food and suffer attrition, in which case people in the army will start to die or leave. The more buildings you can build. I think it's for each 10 pops you have in a region, you can have one building. Or it might be one additional building. It might be one plus every 10 pops. And then you can also do a number of other things. And importantly, the rate at which you research is based on your ratio of citizens to tribesmen. I think it might be based on the skew. So obviously freemen might contribute a bit and slaves none or something. But I know that playing as the Iceni, I was getting a lot of messages saying that my research rate was terrible because my ratio of citizens to everyone else was kind of trash. And that's because obviously as the Iceni you don't have many citizens, but citizens are your researchers, or at least they are more skewed towards research. And that meant that you naturally, as the Iceni or as any other tribal people, don't research very fast. And you might say, well, what's to stop you getting citizens as the Iceni and then just having a lot of citizens? Citizens are very unhappy when they're in a primitive, in inverted commas, culture. They do not like being a tribal chieftain. They will maybe leave you or get events about them leaving. Whereas they're very happy in Rome because they get all their wild boar served on this lovely platter. Whereas if you try and put them in the Iceni area, if you put them in a tribal chiefdom, they will complain that there's not enough slaves and peasants to bring them their stuff, and everything's so, primitive, and the wooden houses aren't anywhere near their marble mansions, so whatever it is. And because of that, you will have a very low research rate. Now, these populations, obviously, they generate resources, they money, you can tax them, you can also build your buildings and your supply, etc. These are going to be a measure of how tough your nation can be. Not just how big it is, but you can have a pretty small nation provided you've got a very high concentration of population. And as we mentioned, that's, a measure of how you build buildings. There are a number of different buildings. The 4 basic ones are obviously stuff like you can increase manpower by having a barracks. You can increase people's population growth rate by having more grain stockpiled in I think it's a granary. And then there are 2 other ones which slightly increase other traits. Mostly, personally, I was spamming more manpower and more population growth rate when I was playing the beta. That just tended to be a function of had a relatively short time to play, and I was just trying to get as many people or as many military units as possible. The other 2 I didn't really use quite so much. Yes, one of the other ones is a fort. The forts work just the same way as EU4, by the way, so those of you who played Europa Universalis 4, you'll recognize the fort system. A fort in a territory means that enemies cannot pass through that territory or adjacent territories without fighting the fort, and you will be stopped from going any further into enemy land. Obviously, Paradox have taken that element and run with it because it works in EU4. Why break it? The last element, though, we've talked about buildings, we've talked about pops, is trade. And these resources can be stuff like wine, or metal, or gems. And each of these does a certain thing. Now, you can trade, for instance, I'm going to do this off the top of my head, and it, of course, might change by release, but grain, wheat specifically. If you import wheat, I believe you get a plus 10% population growth rate in that province. And that's if you have wheat. Now, if you have a surplus of wheat, it stacks. I believe you get, and I'm going to do this off the top of my head, I believe it's another 10%. It might be 5, but it will stack. And then if you export it, you also get a bonus. And this is for all resources. All resources will give you a thing when you have it, give you a thing which is the stacking thing for having more of it. Normally it's less than the first thing. And then they will also give you something if you're exporting it. And you can import a certain amount of resource into a province, and you can export whatever the province has. Now, wheat is the obvious one. It's population growth rate. You've got certain other things. For instance, you need metal to make certain units. For instance, heavy infantry. Heavy infantry, you need metal. So to import metal, bam, I have heavy infantry. Or you could produce heavy metal in that actual province itself. If you have metal there already, you can build your heavy infantry. But that does lead us to a more interesting one, which is that elephants are a resource. And anyone who knows about, for instance, the Phoenician Wars or Carthage will remember, oh, wait, wasn't there that guy who took some elephants through the Alps from the north into Italy and fought the Romans there? But if you get yourself elephants, you can produce war elephants. Now, obviously, someone like Carthage has elephants to begin with in their province, but you can trade with Carthage if they are willing to give you elephants. That means you would then be able to produce war elephants as a unit. Now, they're very expensive. I think they cost 25 gold a unit currently to initially recruit, and I think they take something like a full year. They are very, very time-consuming to recruit. I guess it does take a while to both import the elephants and then train the elephants in how to do war. Of course, this comes with its own certain downsides. If you lose access to a resource, you don't lose access to those units. You have those units. The problem is those units can no longer replenish themselves. Obviously, heavy infantry have no way to replenish their lost equipment, and of course, war elephants have no way to get more war elephants. So those units would be a little bit in difficulty. So importing resources to allow yourself to have military units can be a good idea, but it does have this drawback of you now are reliant on someone for those resources. And if they say, mate, I don't want to give you those resources anymore, you're going to be in some difficulty. But the good news is that provided you are close enough to someone that they want to trade with you, and you can persuade them, you can totally get war elephants as, say, the Iceni. If you can afford them as a barbarian nation like that, it would be possible. It's just not something you could spam. Or you could do it as Rome. If you can get Carthage to like you, maybe? Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is how technologies work. Obviously, you have the military things we've talked about before. You can spend military points to purchase a new military. I'm going to call them a tech. I don't know exactly what the term was. It's effectively a buff to your military in certain areas, and they are hierarchical. You have to get the top one before you can get the next one down, and there are 3 different columns. But in addition, you have technology. And now you accrue technology at a certain rate. As we mentioned before, that is based on the number of citizens you have and the ratio of citizens to other people. And obviously you can put a person in charge of researching, and depending on their ability to research, they will research faster or slower. But you may also spend your civic resource to get innovations. And the innovations are kind of spin, they are flavor. Your technologies will unlock new stuff and allow you to do certain things and all this kind of jazz. And an important one is centralization that your civic technology allows you to do. But innovations allow you to do certain things and certain spins. It might be plus 10% omen duration, and your omens where you get, bonuses to discipline and your fighting ability, or maybe to your population growth, or maybe to your research points will last longer. You can also make them slightly better. These innovations aren't paradigm shifts. But what they are is a slight buff in a certain area, and you can spin your nation to be slightly better at certain things depending on which innovations you'd like to purchase. But of course, each purchase does require you to spend a civic resource. Now, the very final, I'm only allowed to show you about 30 minutes of footage, the very final thing is centralization. If you aren't Rome, if you are a tribal chiefdom, or if you are a tribal federation, which is the slightly more central version of a chieftain, part of the issue of getting as advanced as Rome is centralization. All your people are disparate throughout the lands. They don't even live necessarily in villages. They live in small groups spread out. And whenever you want to do anything, it's difficult to get people together to talk to them because information has to travel, the flow of ideas is slower, there is no city for you. You have to try and get things out by word of mouth to each of the small tribes around. And that is called centralization. And there are some mechanics behind this. I won't go into them in too much depth, but if you want to try and turn into a Rome-like entity where you have more control and more direction and more ability to research, more advanced in inverted commas, or those of you who are used to the old Europa Universalis 4 mechanic, westernization or westernizing, you can do that, but it requires you to become more centralized. If you're playing many of the tribes, you can do that. Tribes also have the ability in some cases to migrate, especially in areas, for instance, like central modern-day Germany, where there's a lot of empty land and forest around there. Tribes can migrate through there and change their land and change their position and do that as they see fit. And you can also then colonize some of that spare land. Hell, Ireland is uncolonized to begin with, and that's not to say no one lives there. People do live there, it's just they don't live there in units that are large enough to exert power. They live in small groups. They don't have an overarching lord who can swing enough power to really do anything. The same is true for central Germany. There are people that live there. There are pops there. If you then go there and you colonize them, you will get those pops. But there is no one who is a nation. There are small enough tribes that they don't matter on the nation scale of Rome or the Iceni, or any of the numerous other groups who are around. But that's basically it for my initial thoughts on Imperator Rome. I'm going to leave it there. I think I've got about maybe 5 minutes more footage I can show you, so I might put together some interesting little clips and do like a really condensed let's play of what happened in maybe like the multiplayer game or something. Or maybe I'll talk about modding. Let me know what you wanted me to talk about down below, and I will maybe see if I've got any footage that I can talk about that of. So I'm really interested to hear your feedback, so I will make whatever I can. I'm allowed 30 minutes of footage, and I will use whatever long this video is in footage, and I will have hopefully a bit spare. So if you want me to talk about something, or maybe just talk about how the multiplayer game went and show you some of the multiplayer footage that we did, I got invaded by Johan, the overall lead for Imperator, and his band of terrible Scandinavians, along with my alliance of British tribes. It was fun. Let me know. But I've been EnterElysium. Let me know if you're interested in that. Also, let me know if you're interested in me covering more Imperator when it comes out. I personally really want to cover it, so it'd be interesting to hear how much you are looking forward to it and how much I should cover it on the channel. But for now, I've been EnterElysium. Remember to like, subscribe, do all that ridiculous jazz. I mean, check out the Patreon, Twitters, and Instagrams. I don't know, Twitch. But yeah, until next time, stay shiny.